Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. Today I have chosen the international edition of the Hindu as we have a number of important articles from international relations and as well as from internal security. I have chosen a total of 9 articles and 8 articles can be important for both prelims and mains. And we have one small topic as well for your prelims. So let's cover all these topics comprehensively so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. So I hope you guys are benefiting from our initiative, and if you find these sessions to be useful, do let us know in the comments. Don't forget to press that like button and do subscribe to our channel. Before we start, I have a very important announcement regarding Success in Prelims initiative that we have launched from last week. This is a weekly opportunity for you to revise your current affairs through MCQ based questions. This weekly test will be conducted exclusively on the Unacademy platform, and the test will go live every Saturday at 8 p.m. So the next test will happen on 14th of September. And in 1 hour, in 60 minutes, you get to attempt 30 MCQs based on current affairs of that week. So do register on the Unacademy app and you can find the link in the description box of this video as well. So let's start with the discussion by looking at this important column on page number 8 written by Rajiv Bhatia. Rajiv Bhatia is a former Indian diplomat from the Indian Foreign Service, and he has had a distinguished career and he is seen as an Africa expert. He has been India's High Commissioner to South Africa, Kenya, Lesotho. He has written a book on India-Africa relations as well, which is very insightful. So based on his expertise on India-Africa relations, he writes a very important column examining the China-Africa Forum Summit that was conducted recently. Some of you might remember, a few days ago, I had covered this topic under the prelim section of the Hindu analysis. There was a mains related column as well where we had analyzed the developments of the China-Africa Forum Summit. But I feel that this column by Rajiv Bhatia, who is an expert on India-Africa relations, it brings out fresh insight which could be very important for a possible mains question on this topic. In fact, in the upcoming mains itself, there could be a question on China-Africa Forum Summit and the lessons for India. So that's why I feel the topic is very important. So let's take a closer look at the analysis provided by Rajiv Bhatia. So first, for beginners, I would like to cover the basic facts regarding the China-Africa Forum Summit, which is formally or officially called as the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, or FOCAC. Now, this is a periodic summit held between China and all the African countries except for Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland. Out of the 54 African nations which are part of African Union, 53 countries out of these 54, they participate in the China-Africa Forum Summit. Eswatini doesn't participate. China doesn't invite Eswatini because they do not have diplomatic relations. As Eswatini has recognized Taiwan, which goes against China's One China policy, Beijing has cut off relations with this country, with this small country in southern Africa. So apart from Eswatini, the other 53 African countries, they regularly work with China through the FOCAC conference, or the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. This initiative was started in the year 2000, and the summit is held regularly once in every 3 years. So over the last 24 years, China and African countries have been hosting this summit periodically once in 3 years. The host rotates between China and one African country, and during every summit, these countries together have managed to achieve substantial progress, which has cemented China's influential position in Africa. In fact, Africa's engagement with China, China's presence in Africa, goes all the way back to 1960s. Since 1960s, China has believed that Africa deserves a priority in its foreign policy. And this is very evident in the outcomes of this year's China-Africa Forum Summit. If you look at the final outcomes in the joint statement, there are some significant announcements and agreements between China and African countries. So first, let's take a quick look at the outcomes and then we will carry out the detailed analysis. China has announced a massive funding of up to $50 billion to aid the development and growth of African nations over the next 3 years. Out of these $50 billion, more than half of it will come in the form of Chinese loans, in the form of concessional credit. Chinese banks would be funding more than $25 billion. They will be pumping this money into African projects over the next 3 years. Around 11 billion will be funded by the Chinese government in the form of assistance, in the form of grants, which need not be paid back. And another 10 billion will be pumped by Chinese companies. The PRC will encourage private Chinese companies to invest around $10 billion in Africa. So collectively, around $50 billion in funding over the next 3 years has been promised. Because in diplomacy, money can fetch influence. As simple as that. In the world of geopolitics, it is a very transactional world. It's always based on reciprocity. It's always based on give and take. So powerful economies like China gain influence by exercising the financial capabilities that they have. And China has been cornering influence in Africa for many, many years through its financing, through its funding. So today that is what we will specifically focus upon. And also please note, China is aiding in the development of Africa as well. It has promised to create more than 1 million jobs, which could bring economic growth and socio-economic development in Africa. These investments will directly translate to more than 1 million jobs. And China is also focused on the strategic security domain as well. It's not just economic relations and political diplomatic relations which are a priority. Apart from the focus on political diplomatic ties and economic cooperation, China has major focus on security defense relations, including maritime security. So during the China-Africa Forum Summit, China has promised to assist African countries in training its military and security forces. China is setting aside around $141 million in grants to train more than 6,000 African soldiers along with police and law enforcement officers from African nations. So this allows China to play a role in capacity building, to enhance the capacity of the defense and security forces in Africa, and thus cement China's pivotal position in the security of Africa. Also, China is focused on training the youth, especially women, and building cultural relations as well. China plans to bring more than 1,000 African political leaders to China and focus on training 60,000 women and youth so that this could aid the cultural people-to-people relations and boost the economy of Africa. And finally, China has promised duty-free access to 33 least developed countries so that their exports to China can increase. China has offered zero tariff treatment, essentially duty-free access to the Chinese market. Out of the 54 African countries, 33 of them are labeled as LDCs, least developed countries, meaning they face significant developmental challenges. So to aid their economy, to boost their exports, China is giving them market access into the Chinese market by giving them duty-free access. So these were the major outcomes as far as economic, security and political diplomatic relations were concerned. Now, based on these outcomes, let's understand why China is so focused on Africa. Let's also discuss where does India stand? How do we compete with China? So this is something that we need to bring out through this analysis. As I told you, the PRC has always given a top priority to Africa in its worldview. If you look at PRC's foreign policy since the 1960s, Africa has always acquired a top priority. In fact, it was further streamlined when the FOCAC conference was launched in 2000. And the consistency with which China has been hosting this summit clearly shows the focus and priority of China. Once in every 3 years, without fail, the summit is organized by China and the African countries. Even during the pandemic, a virtual summit was organized by China. So for the last 24 years, without a break, China has consistently engaged all the African nations, except for Eswatini, and this clearly shows the priority that China is giving to Africa. But the question is why? Why does China consider Africa to be so critical? In fact, not just China, most global powers, including United States, India and others, they all believe that Africa holds the key to the future. See, Africa might be a backward continent. It might be suffering from civil wars and conflicts and authoritarian regimes and terrorism. It might be affected due to lack of education, lack of healthcare and a high disease burden. But despite all that, Africa is blessed with immense natural resources. You name it, you can find those resources in Africa. From hydrocarbon reserves, including oil, gas, coal, to uranium and precious metals like gold, silver and even diamond, and even precious minerals from iron to copper to zinc, manganese, molybdenum, and as well as critical strategic minerals from lithium to vanadium, nickel, cobalt. All these vital resources are found in Africa. Africa has a very large young population as well. So with the right education, right skill development, with improved healthcare, African youth could play a critical role in the coming decades to power the global economy. And also don't forget, Africa is blessed with vast tracts of agricultural land. So in the coming decades, for food security, which could be threatened by climate change, African agricultural land could be crucial, and most countries are investing in agriculture and food processing as well. So Africa could very well become the food basket of the world in the coming decades. So no wonder China, even India and US and many other global powers, they give top focus to their relations with Africa. And China takes the lead amongst every other power as it has engaged with Africa over the last 40-50 years, and it has consistently stepped up its investments. So if you look at China and its engagement here, it is very evident. The Chinese footprint is very, very clear all across Africa, from North Africa to East Africa to West Africa to Southern and Central Africa. Across the continent, you find a strong Chinese footprint. According to a leading scholar, George Yu, he had noted in 1960s itself that the Chinese dragon is evident across the African bush. So you can imagine how China has grown its influence in the last few decades, especially after it launched the Belt and Road Initiative. Because through such programs, China has been bringing billions of dollars in investment. It is playing a role in securing the security interests of African countries, and it is aiding the development of African countries. So through this all-round relationship that China has been building, it has stepped up its diplomatic influence and of course its strategic presence and influence. So this is where countries like India would face a significant challenge. Now let's see how China has been able to achieve this influence. So Rajiv Bhatia strongly believes that one reason why China has succeeded in Africa is because of its consistency. China has never forgotten Africa. It has never neglected Africa. Over the last 4-5 decades, it has constantly engaged with African countries bilaterally and also through African groupings like African Union and other sub-regional groups that are present in Africa. Especially through the China-Africa Forum Summit, which was started in 2000. China has stepped up its engagement, and this consistency has been vital in stepping up Chinese influence across Africa. So right now, China's priority is to bring synergy between various initiatives. For example, African Union has an agenda for 2063. This is the development agenda of Africa. African Union, which represents all the African nations as a regional group, it has brought out the 2063 agenda focused on development of Africa. development in education, healthcare, with regard to socio-economic welfare. So African Union has set an agenda, a target for 2063. Parallelly, we have the UN 2030 agenda, which is nothing but your sustainable development goals, which prioritizes Africa from tackling poverty to providing clean water and air to improving education and health. Africa gets top priority under the sustainable development goals of the 2030 agenda of the UN. Now, China wants to synchronize these regional and global targets with its own initiatives such as Belt and Road Initiative and the 3 flagship programs that have been launched by Chinese Premier Xi Jinping. China has launched 3 flagship initiatives called the Global Development Initiative, through which China is trying to provide development assistance to the countries of the global south. It is trying to provide developmental assistance to developing and underdeveloped countries. It has launched the Global Civilizational Initiative, the GCI, to focus on cultural and civilizational ties to revive the historical connect with other countries. And finally, it has launched the Global Security Initiative to build close security relations with focus on maritime security. So these are 3 flagship programs of China focused on various developing countries and underdeveloped countries, which runs in parallel to its ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, also called the One Belt, One Road project of China. I am sure all of you are familiar with the BRI. Over the last decade, through the BRI initiative or One Belt, One Road initiative, China has made major investments in road projects, railway projects, oil pipelines, power plants, industrial clusters, and even maritime corridors and seaports. Under the maritime component, the 21st century maritime Silk Route, China has tried to revive the ancient maritime Silk Route by investing in strategic ports across Asia, Africa, and Europe. From Hambantota port in Sri Lanka to Chittagong in Bangladesh, to Kyokfu in Myanmar, to several ports in East Africa, in Kenya, Mozambique, in Djibouti, in West Africa as well. China is involved in port construction near the Gulf of Guinea. Plus, it has scaled up the land-based component as well. Across Central Asia, South Asia, Eurasia region and Europe, China is expanding its connectivity projects, infrastructure projects to further connect with all these regions to boost Chinese economic relations and thus step up its economic and strategic influence. So parallel to the Belt and Road Initiative, Xi Jinping has launched these 3 flagship programs. The Global Development Initiative to give development assistance and funds, the Global Security Initiative to assist the security cooperation with other countries, and Global Civilizational Initiative to promote cultural and people-to-people relations. So this is the all-round approach of China. China is tapping the cultural civilizational heritage, and it is utilizing that to gain advantages which can help China secure key projects and establish its military presence as well. So as China's economic influence grows across the Indo-Pacific, particularly around Africa and the Indian Ocean region, the Chinese armed forces, particularly the PLA Navy, has become more ambitious and outgoing. The PLA Navy is very proactive in the Indian Ocean and it has been involved in anti-piracy operations near Horn of Africa and Gulf of Aden. This is a critical shipping lane. It passes through choke points like Bab el-Mandeb Strait, where Chinese Navy has established a strong presence, and it has even set up its first foreign military base in Africa, in a small African country called Djibouti, which faces the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. China has opened its first foreign military base, thus establishing a permanent military presence in Africa and the Indian Ocean. Even in West Africa, Chinese military presence has gone up consistently and it has become a significant player in the security affairs of Africa. So this allows China to counter the traditional dominance of United States and European powers, which have been the traditional military presence in Africa. Be it Britain, France, United States. These three Western powers predominantly have dominated the military landscape, the security landscape of Africa. But now China is countering the Western influence, which allows China to cement its position. In fact, if you look at the joint statement that was issued after the China-Africa Forum Summit, there was something very interesting which caught my attention. African countries and China have acknowledged that China was the first country which supported African Union's entry into G20. Now, this in a way undermines India's efforts. Last year, when we hosted the G20 summit, it was India which gave leadership to the African countries, and it was at India's insistence that African Union was given membership to the G20. India even hosted Voice of the Global South Summit to bring the Global South countries, the developing, underdeveloped countries together, and to give a voice to the African nations. And it was the push given by India which allowed African Union to secure a membership at G20. But now African Union is thanking China, acknowledging China as the first country which supported AU's membership into G20. That again goes on to show how China can leverage its influence and even undermine the influence of others like India. So this is where I think India faces a significant challenge when it comes to countering the Chinese influence. In fact, if you look at China's position as well, there's something striking which stands out. China has never backed UN reforms. It has never supported India's demand for a permanent seat at UN Security Council. But interestingly, China is supporting UN reforms to allow Africa to be represented at the UN Security Council. So that shows that Africa gets a priority treatment from China. China has a preferential treatment towards Africa. China is willing to back African representation at UN Security Council and UN reforms for that purpose. But parallelly, it doesn't support UN reforms when it comes to India's demand and the demand of the G4 countries, that includes India, Japan, Germany and Brazil, who are also demanding a permanent seat at UNSC. So China counters the demands of India and the G4, but it is parallelly backing African representation at the Security Council. So that again shows the hypocrisy of China, the challenge that we face when it comes to dealing with a country like China. So now coming to Africa, Chinese influence has been cemented mainly through its investments, through its projects and financial resources that China has managed to pull in. That is very evident from the Chinese projects that are going on across Africa. And China has worked closely with African Continental Free Trade Area, and it is trying to step up the economic relationship. They have even proposed a framework economic partnership, so China and the African Continental Free Trade Area countries can create a free trade agreement to promote the free movement of goods between China and these African countries. So if such a free trade agreement is worked out in the coming years, this would be a bigger boost for China's economic relations with Africa. So these flagship programs, the Global Development Initiative, Security Initiative and Civilizational Initiative, which operate in parallel to Belt and Road Initiative, it has given China a lot of heft, a lot of leverage in countries like African countries. So this is where China is supporting Africa with regard to increased UN funding. As a permanent member, China is one of the P5 countries. As a permanent member of the UNSC, it is pushing the UN to provide more funding as well to African countries so that they can independently conduct their peacekeeping operations. You might know that many African countries are going through civil wars and conflicts where UN peacekeeping forces are deployed. In many of these peacekeeping missions, majority of the troops are Indian troops. India is one of the biggest troop contributing countries to UN peacekeeping operations. But now China is insisting that African countries should be able to conduct their independent peacekeeping operations collectively with UN support and UN funding, including countering terrorism. Several African countries are badly affected by radical terrorism in East Africa as well as in West and North Africa. You have several terror outfits from Al-Qaeda to Islamic State to Boko Haram to Al-Shabaab. So there has been a Western presence here when it comes to counterterrorism. United States, France and Britain, they have been the major security players countering terrorism in the region. Even Russia of late has become a significant player in countering terrorism. Russian private mercenaries like Wagner Group, at the behest of the Russian state, has also been involved in counter-terrorist operations. So this is where China is trying to counter not just the Western powers but even Russia to cement its security position. So China is becoming a key partner in counter-terrorism as well and in strengthening the maritime security of African nations. So that is why we should pay attention to the military support that China has announced. $141 million in funding for training soldiers and police and law enforcement officers. China already is a weapons supplier as well to many African countries. And China has no issues in dealing with dictators and authoritarian regimes and even with rebel groups. So this allows China to work with different political players, and China secures its interests, which creates a challenge for countries like India. But however, there are some problems as well in this relationship. It's not that African countries blindly trust China. African countries have their own concerns when it comes to engaging with China. Because eventually, the reality is that this will be a donor-recipient relationship. China will always be a superior partner, the dominant partner, dictating terms to the weaker African countries. So definitely some countries are not comfortable with this arrangement. Also, there have been concerns about China's so-called debt trap diplomacy. It's alleged by Western governments, Western think tanks and Western media and several strategic experts as well in India. Even Indian media, Indian government believes that China does engage in a predatory credit policy or debt policy that is pushing small countries into a debt burden. Quite often, experts bring up the example of countries like Sri Lanka, how the Hambantota port project in southern Sri Lanka failed commercially, pushing Sri Lankan government into a debt trap, and eventually Sri Lanka had to lease the Hambantota port to Chinese company for 99 years. So in a way, China secures strategic projects and controls them when these commercial ventures fail, and this leads to a theory that China deliberately invests in these commercial projects which are viable, which are liable to fail, and once the projects fail and country falls into a debt burden, it takes over those projects with a strategic intention. Potentially, these key ports could turn into a naval base for Chinese Navy to provide logistical support, which increases the operational range of the Chinese PLA, right? So this concern remains with African countries as well, because some African countries have fallen under a debt trap. They have not been able to repay the loans that they have borrowed. But however, there is a counter argument as well. A few experts say that the debt trap which is seen in certain countries is largely because of economic mismanagement by the respective governments. Some governments in Africa and Asia which have borrowed from China, they have not run the economy efficiently. Due to overall economic mismanagement, those countries face liquidity problems and forex problems, and eventually they end up falling into a debt trap. But either ways, some African countries do have a concern about China's true intentions. African countries do have this concern about China being the dominant partner in this donor-recipient relationship, and they are worried about the drawbacks, the risks associated with Chinese loans and Chinese funds. Because this is not charity that China is doing. It comes attached with conditions. China will expect countries to cooperate to help China step up its strategic security, military presence and diplomatic influence. China would expect to corner the control over African resources, especially critical mines. So this is something African countries may not be entirely comfortable with. So of course, some African countries do express the concern, but still China does manage to cement its position, because see, China looks at itself as the world's largest developing country. It is indeed the largest developing country, and most African countries are developing countries as well, right? So this naturally allows China to work with them. China looks at this as a natural relationship between developing countries of the global south. Now this is exactly where India faces a competition, because India, as one of the largest developing nations, as a traditional leader of the global south, we also position ourselves as a leader of these developing underdeveloped countries. From 1950s, India has been trying to give voice to the global south countries, trying to assist the global south countries, especially in Africa. So when China already takes a lead, it becomes more challenging for India to counter the Chinese influence. And also don't forget, China's approach towards the world, especially towards Africa and the Indo-Pacific, is driven by its anti-Americanism. Given the Cold War rivalry which has begun between US and China, as these global powers compete with each other for influence, China's approach towards Africa is primarily driven by anti-Americanism, and it's trying to create a coalition of like-minded countries. So this will secure China global support, diplomatic support at platforms like United Nations. So China's one intention is to bring all the developing, underdeveloped countries, especially in Africa, together and use them to back China's position against the issues that China has with United States. So this anti-Americanism is very evident in China's approach, and China believes that these developing, underdeveloped countries of Africa can be a perfect counterweight to American influence across this region. So these are the various motives of China, and this is the achievement of China as well. Now here there are some key lessons for India. That is exactly what Rajiv Bhatia is focusing upon. India needs to draw some lessons from China's engagement with Africa. See, even India has given top priority to its African diplomacy. As I told you, from 1947, India has been a champion of the global south. The then Nehru government supported the decolonization efforts in Africa. We stood with the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, backing Nelson Mandela. India has been a key development partner, and we also share historical civilizational links. From centuries, from millennium, India has had an ancient link with Africa. From Gujarati money lenders to Indian traders, right? Since centuries, there has been a trading relationship. If you go to East Africa, even today, you find a very strong Indian community. In countries like Kenya, Tanzania, in South Africa and many other countries, there's a very strong Indian presence even today. A lot of Indian laborers were transported by the British as part of the indentured labor system as well. So there is a clear Indian footprint in Africa, especially in Eastern and Southern Africa. So India has tried to bring greater focus on its African diplomacy, and the then Manmohan Singh government launched a major initiative called India-Africa Forum Summit. It was launched in 2008, and we have held 3 summits until 2015. So 3 editions of India-Africa Forum Summit have been held by India, which is almost similar and comparable to the China-Africa Forum Summit. This is an opportunity for India to work with all the African countries and the major groupings like African Union. And also bilaterally, India has stepped up its relations, its engagement in Africa. We have started giving line of credit, which is a concessional loan from India to aid the development of African countries. India has become a key development partner. For example, if you look at Africa's healthcare system, India is almost the backbone of Africa's healthcare. Because see, Africa suffers from a very high disease burden, from various communicable contagious diseases like HIV to Ebola and tuberculosis to even non-communicable diseases and other health conditions. African countries suffer immensely. They have very poor healthcare system, and India almost becomes the backbone of Africa's healthcare. As the pharmacy of the world, which produces the largest number of vaccines and drugs, right? We supply generic drugs, the cheapest possible drugs to African countries. India supplies vaccines. There are Indian hospital chains and pharma companies and diagnostic labs from India which have invested heavily in Africa. So in Africa's healthcare, there is a very clear Indian footprint. And also a lot of African patients come to India for medical treatment. So there is a strong medical tourism relationship that exists. And also we have the Pan-African E-Network project, a soft power initiative of India. It was launched based on the idea suggested by APJ Abdul Kalam. When Dr. Abdul Kalam was the President of India, he visited African countries on an official diplomatic visit. He saw the enormous suffering, the lack of education and healthcare, And he suggested to India, to the government, that why don't we use ISRO's satellite resources to deliver tele-education, telemedicine to Africa. So based on this, Ministry of External Affairs conceptualized the Pan-African e-network project, and India has delivered free telemedicine and tele-education, thus enabling African students and African patients to access Indian colleges, Indian universities and Indian hospitals. So there is a wide Indian presence. A lot of Indian companies also have made a significant presence in Africa. Recently, we have stepped up our diplomatic presence by opening new embassies, high commissions, more consulates, and also we have given more attention to West and North Africa, which in general were neglected. Traditionally, our focus was more on Eastern and Southern Africa, where we were historically connected, where there was a stronger Indian community. But now India is focusing on West Africa, even Central Africa, where precious resources are found. For example, in DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, even though there is a civil war going on, the country is blessed with lithium. China, Russia have already secured their lithium supplies. So India is also trying to work with the DRC. We have recently set up Kabil Khanij Videsh India Limited, which is scouting for critical strategic minerals around the world, and it is looking to enter into deals with DRC to secure lithium mines in the country. So we are stepping up our focus as well, but the point is we have not been consistent like China. India-Africa Forum Summit has not been held in almost a decade. By next year, it will be a decade since the last India-Africa Forum Summit was held. Now, this is the biggest criticism against India's Africa policy by Rajiv Bhatia. Compared to China, which has been so consistent, it's engaging with African countries every 3 years. It's dealing with them bilaterally, focusing on the investments and projects. But India lacks the consistency. Even though we say that Africa is a priority, we have revived our African diplomacy, we are not consistent, and for almost a decade, India-Africa Forum Summit has not taken place. So the writer says this is a key lesson for India. And also don't forget, leveraging your historical, cultural relations along with financial generosity is critical to build a relationship. See, you might have all the soft power and goodwill in the world. You might have civilizational links, age-old relations, strong cultural people-to-people relations, but that alone is not sufficient. You need to match that with funding, with loans and even security assistance in order to step up your presence and influence. So this is where India is found to be lacking as compared to China. So these are the key lessons that we can take away from here. So what we need is a stronger political will and diplomatic farsightedness to secure India's interests in Africa while countering the Chinese presence, which is rising across Africa and the Indian Ocean. So this is what we take away from this important column. You can expect a mains question from here. Take a look at this practice question. With African governments finding it more comfortable to deal with China, the recent China-Africa Forum Summit needs objective scrutiny as there are key takeaways for India. Examine the statement. So essentially, the question says that African countries have become slightly more comfortable when it comes to dealing with China, which is true. Because initially, African countries were hesitant. They saw China as a transactional partner. They didn't trust China entirely, given the theories about debt trap diplomacy. But of late, African governments have become more comfortable, even though they know the risks, even though they know what China is looking for. They have become more comfortable in dealing with China because African countries also realize that they need China and its assistance to develop their countries. So China-Africa relationship is all poised to grow further. So in this context, in the context of the recent China-Africa Forum Summit, you have to carefully examine, scrutinize the takeaways and observe the implications for India. That is what you need to do. So you need to carry out an unbiased analysis. You need to maybe introduce the answer by talking about the importance of Africa in geopolitics. Talk about its geography, its resources, why Africa can play a critical role in the future. Then in the body, discuss the great power competition in Africa. How global powers are competing for influence to secure their interests, from Western powers to China to India, and focus on China's engagement with Africa. Some examples, some pointers regarding China's initiatives in Africa. China-Africa Forum Summit, the key outcomes, the financial support, the investments, the projects that we discussed, you can use that to back up your argument that China has indeed become the most significant player in Africa, even going to the extent of countering United States and Western powers. Then you discuss the lessons and takeaways for India. Talk about India's own engagement in Africa and what are the shortcomings in our engagement. How do we compare with China? And conclude your answer with a suggestion regarding how India can improve its engagement, regarding how India can step up its presence and influence to protect our interests, our national interests. So I think that would make for a good answer with a very good structure. Now let's move on to the next topic. So today's international edition is filled with articles related to international relations and security. That's why I chose the international edition today, as it's much more relevant compared to the Delhi edition of today's The Hindu. So we have another column related to IR again, but this time the focus is India's relations with United Arab Emirates. Recently, the Crown Prince of UAE visited India and key agreements were signed. This shows the remarkable progress which is happening in India-UAE relations. In the West Asia region, which is so crucial for India, UAE is one of our most important strategic partners. See, West Asia is critical for our oil and energy security. Most of our oil gas imports comes from West Asian countries and UAE is a top supplier. It's one of the top 4 or top 5 suppliers of oil and gas to India. Then if you look at the Indian diaspora, across West Asia there is a very strong Indian community. Close to 10 million Indians reside and work across West Asian countries. Ensuring their safety, their well-being is a top focus for India. Because the Indian community is playing a big role contributing to our relations with West Asia. They are sending remittances back home, which is crucial for our economy as well to bridge our current account deficit. More than 50% of the total remittances we get is coming from West Asia alone. Every year we get around $100 billion plus in remittances from the Indian diaspora around the world. And more than $50 billion is coming just from West Asian countries. So that shows the strength of the Indian community here. The strongest Indian diaspora is present across the West Asia region and the largest diaspora is present in United Arab Emirates. So no wonder UAE is one of the most important partners for India when it comes to our West Asia policy. So let's take a quick look at how the relations have developed, where do we stand, what are the achievements, what were the new agreements that were signed, how does it take the relationship to the next level. So this article is written by a government representative of United Arab Emirates. The author, she is the special envoy of UAE to Republic of India. She is a minister for international cooperation as well within the Emirati government. So she has great insight about India-UAE relations and she presents a very good picture about this important relationship. So let's begin with the visit of the Crown Prince. Crown Prince Sheikh Khalid visited India just a couple of days ago and key agreements have been signed between the two sides. So I'm sure you know that UAE is a constitutional monarchy comprising of different Emiratis coming together to form a sovereign state. UAE is a major geopolitical power in West Asia. It's a Sunni power aligned with the Sunni power bloc led by Saudi Arabia. It's a close Western ally, very close to United States and European powers, and a major player in the oil market and a key player in the geopolitics of the entire West Asia region. So naturally for India, having good relations with such an important power is very crucial. But the writer is humble and modest enough to acknowledge that UAE is a small dot when compared to India, compared to the size of the country, the size of the economy, the size of the population. Clearly the writer acknowledges the massiveness of India and how UAE pales in comparison. The writer says that India is almost 40 times larger than the Emirati. The most populous country, clearly, in terms of population as well, right? We are many times larger than UAE and across various economic sectors, right? She compares the agriculture sector and she says that even though agricultural cooperation is important between two countries, it makes up less than 1% of UAE's GDP. So compared to that, India is an agriculture giant. See, UAE might be a giant in oil and gas, but India dominates every other sector. So comparatively, India is many times larger in every aspect as compared to the UAE, be it the size of the defense forces, the size of the economy, and as well as our diplomatic influence, right? India does stand out, and India can in a way dominate over UAE, but that is not the relationship between the two. UAE could also have leveraged its advantage. For example, India depends on UAE for cheap oil and gas supplies, which is critical for our energy and economic security. But UAE has been a very reliable, trusted supplier. It has never used the advantage to charge more for the oil and gas prices or to leverage that against India. So we have a trust-based relationship. There is great affinity between the two states. And this also is a result of the ancient relations we have with the Arabian Peninsula. See, if you look at the map, if you look at the geography of the region, India and the Persian Gulf, the Arabian region, it's bound by the Arabian Sea. This is the geographical link which has bound the people and the two civilizations. The writer talks about archaeological evidence being discovered in UAE that links the Persian Gulf with the Indus Valley civilization, pointing to millennium-old relationship between the two societies and cultures. Religion plays a very important role. Islam, as a common cultural factor, binds India with West Asia and of course with United Arab Emirates. Since centuries, there has been maritime trade going on between the Indian subcontinent and the Arabian Peninsula. Again, Indian traders, Gujarati financiers, Arab traders have been working together from centuries, forming an age-old cultural people-to-people relationship. So it is on this people-based, trust-based relationship that we are building the contemporary relationship. We might have different political structures because UAE compared to India is a more conservative and a more inward-looking country. While India is a thriving, liberal, moderate democracy, UAE stands out as a conservative, a theocratic and even authoritarian state at times. Though the major cities like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, etc. are more open, in general, most of the states in West Asia are seen as conservative, authoritarian, despite their close links with Western powers. But what is important is that despite the differences we have in our politics, in our society, in our beliefs, in our values, we still work together because we have common interests and we have an age-old historical relationship. So it's only natural for India UAE to work together. And in fact, what is interesting is that 3 generations of UAE leaders have visited India. For example, the Crown Prince Sheikh Zayed visited just a few days ago. A few years ago in 2016, his father, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed, had visited India as a chief guest for the Republic Day parade. That shows that India gives priority to countries like UAE because the guests who are invited to be the chief guest at the Republic Day parade, it's a symbolic message from India that we are prioritizing relations with that country, at least for that year. In fact, that year in 2016-2017, we elevated our relationship to the strategic partnership level. Before that, his father, the then Crown Prince of UAE, had visited India. So 3 generations of leaders have repeatedly visited the country, and it shows the close relationship that we have. Look at the strong people-to-people connection that we have today. I was talking about the Indian presence. This is the largest Indian diaspora community. See, within UAE as well, the Indian community is the largest expatriate community, and for India, UAE is home to the largest diaspora community in the world. Compared to any other country, the largest Indian community is found in this small country, 3.5 million Indians. Then comes United States and then comes Saudi Arabia. In US, you have around 3.1 million Indians. Saudi Arabia maybe around 2.7, 2.9 million Indians. So amongst all the countries in the world, this is where the largest Indian community is found. Most are Indian workers. A number of them, majority of them are blue-collared workers. They have basic education, basic skills. But they play a key role in the economy of UAE, in the oil industry, construction sector, hospitality industry. Today, there are white-collar workers from India as well, those with high education, high skills. essentially professionals, from software engineers to banking experts, financial experts, investment bankers, even doctors, lawyers, teachers. They're all working in this country, forming a strong bond between the two sides. So this strong Indian presence, where the Indian community is contributing to the economy of UAE, it clearly illustrates the strength of this relationship. In fact, the writer points out that there are 1,500 flights every week between the two countries. Can you imagine that? This clearly shows the close connectivity we have. It establishes close connectivity that promotes people-to-people relations, the movement of people. So, Dubai, UAE or Abu Dhabi are very popular for Indian tourists. There's a large flow of Indian tourists as well. Plus businessmen, traders and the diaspora community. They keep traveling, establishing strong economic relations and driving the trade relationship. So we cemented this trade relationship 2 years ago by signing a free trade agreement. This, according to me, has been the biggest development in India-UAE relations. 2 years ago, the Modi government signed the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, and they have provided duty-free access to most of the exports of each other. Most exports from both countries have been given preferential treatment with zero tariff, and this encourages free movement of goods, services and even investments. Recently, we have implemented the bilateral investment treaty as an extension to the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. This facilitates not just the free movement of goods, but also the free movement of services and even investments. See, UAE can be a major investor in India. India is a growing market, one of the fastest growing economies. It aims to become a developed country, a $5 trillion economy, and for that we need investments in key industries, in infrastructure. And UAE is sitting on pile loads of petrodollars earned by selling oil and gas. So UAE needs such attractive investment destinations, and that is why UAE is a major investor in India. In the oil industry, for example, even if you look at the tech startups in India, several startups in India are funded by funds from investors from UAE. Many infrastructure projects in India which are coming up are funded by UAE. So this investment partnership is also critical. When Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed visited India in 2016-2017, he promised close to $50 billion in funding to India, right? Mainly to focus on infrastructure creation in India. Also, UAE is a key supplier of oil, as I was mentioning, and especially to facilitate a strategic project of India called Indian Strategic Petroleum Reserves. See, since India is very vulnerable to shocks in the oil market, the supply might be disrupted because of geopolitical developments, or prices might shoot up because of demand-supply mismatch. So a country like India, which is dependent on oil imports, could be affected by these supply shocks and price shocks. So it's important to create a buffer, right? It's important to store enough oil in our country to create a buffer so that we can reduce our dependency on immediate imports. So for that reason, India is executing a strategic project called Indian Strategic Petroleum Reserves. Phase 1 of the project is already completed, where 3 massive underground storage facilities have been constructed. One in Mangaluru in Karnataka, the other in Padur near Udupi, and the third near Visakhapatnam in Andhra Pradesh. Second phase of the project also has begun, where 4 more massive underground storage facilities are being created, where crude oil can be stored, which can create a 30-day buffer for India. As of now, phase 1 of the project has given at least a 2-week buffer, and once phase 2 is completed, we will have a 1-month buffer. We'll have enough crude oil stored, and this will allow India to secure its energy security. We don't have to depend on immediate imports. So if there is a crisis in the oil market, we can lay low, we can stay away from importing to protect ourselves from the shock event, or we can look for other cheap, reliable suppliers. So this key project is backed by UAE. It is UAE's national oil company, the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, which is owned by the Emirati, which is owned by the Sheikhs, which has invested in this project and supplied cheap, reliable oil to India to fill up the underground storage facilities. So we have renewed this cooperation by signing a new agreement. So Prime Minister Modi, when he met with Crown Prince of UAE, 4 important agreements were signed. One was to renew the cooperation in supporting India's strategic petroleum reserve project, to supply cheap, reliable crude oil to India, which can be stored in these underground facilities to create a buffer stock for India. And also, don't forget, the free trade agreement that we signed 2 years ago has already seen a lot of success, according to the writer. There has been a 15% jump in bilateral trade. See, don't forget, UAE is already one of the top trading partners of India. It's amongst the top 3 trading partners of India. If you take only countries, China and United States are in the top 2 position. They are the top 2 trading partners for India. Sometimes China is the number 1 trading partner, sometimes United States is the number 1 trading partner. It changes from year to year, but these are the top 2 trading partners for India. So after China, US, it is United Arab Emirates, which is the 3rd largest trading partner for India, if you exclude European Union. Is that clear? So that shows the importance of this trade relationship. It's already valued at around 60 to 70 billion dollars. So now with this free trade agreement, the goal is to push it above $100 billion a year, and already we have seen a 15% jump in bilateral trade. Now this is immensely beneficial for India because the duty-free access will mainly benefit labor-intensive industries, export-oriented labor-intensive industries like gems and jewelry, leather, furniture, medical devices, and other key industries in India which are job-generating industries. So the significant increase in India's exports to UAE will create more jobs in India. Lakhs of jobs could be created. And the writer notes that the free trade agreement has already registered a big success by increasing the trade volume by more than 15%. I am sure you also know that we have integrated our payment systems. India's UPI has been extended to UAE to facilitate real-time cross-border payments. And we are also implementing a system to settle the trade in national currencies. We are essentially moving towards de-dollarization to reduce our dependency on the US dollar, and we are establishing a rupee dirham trading relationship to settle the trade balance by using our national currencies, by using the Indian rupee and UAE's dirham. So this is a special relationship because of this. Plus, if you look at the new agreements, we have signed an agreement for long-term supply of LNG. UAE can be a major supplier of natural gas. Right now, Qatar is a major supplier. Recently, we signed a deal with Brunei to secure LNG supplies, and now with UAE, we are securing long-term supply of LNG. This further guarantees our energy security, and don't forget, natural gas is much cleaner compared to your traditional fossil fuels. And also, it is seen as a transition fuel as we move towards a cleaner economy. So as we move away from coal, crude oil and other dirty forms of fossil fuel towards clean energy, towards solar and wind, natural gas can be the perfect transition fuel. So UAE can be a key supplier that can guarantee our energy security while we achieve our climate action targets. And also we have signed a historic agreement in nuclear cooperation. A civil nuclear deal has been signed. This was the biggest outcome during the visit. We are also cooperating in the field of critical minerals, green hydrogen and critical emerging technologies. Because UAE is also a hub of tech-based startups. UAE is focusing on research and innovation along with focus on nuclear and space sector. So India's NPCIL and the nuclear energy company of UAE have signed an agreement as part of the civil nuclear deal that steps up India's nuclear profile. We've already signed civil nuclear agreements with many countries. Can you please let me know with which countries we have signed civil nuclear agreements? Please let me know in the comments. So this deal with UAE acquires a lot of significance because it will allow India to play a role in the nuclear energy sector of UAE. The focus is on nuclear plant operations and maintenance, where NPCIL can share its expertise and help UAE in implementing electricity projects using nuclear energy, right? And also, both countries are focusing on cooperation in green hydrogen. And don't forget, we both are part of the proposed IMEC corridor, India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor that was announced last year. So India, UAE will be key links as part of the IMEC corridor that can boost connectivity and trade. So this explains why this relationship is so critical. We even have started a trilateral cooperation with France in the nuclear energy sector. A couple of years ago, the foreign ministers of India, France and UAE met, and there is a trilateral cooperation that exists between the three countries, and the three countries are focusing on nuclear energy cooperation. There is space cooperation as well. UAE wants to put satellites in orbit and it is looking to work with ISRO. ISRO is already a partner with the space program of UAE, and we also have very good defense relations with each other. We have very good defense relations with each other. We have joint military exercises as well, such as Desert Cyclone, where the Indian Army and UAE's armed forces come together. Also, UAE hosts a multilateral exercise, Air Force exercise called Desert Flag, where Indian Air Force is invited regularly. So we have such joint military cooperation. UAE also provides us logistical support when necessary. If our aircraft need refueling when they are traveling over long distances, or if our naval ships need any logistical support, UAE ports and airports are opened up for Indian vessels and Indian aircraft. So we do have close security relations. As Indian Navy deploys more into the Arabian Sea and Persian Gulf, countries like UAE can be very important military partners for India. So that is the reason why this is a very special relationship in the region. In fact, in the field of education, we are expanding our relations. IIT Delhi has opened its first major foreign campus in Abu Dhabi. So there is all-round development happening in this relationship, from science and technology to nuclear research, critical emerging technologies to energy security to investments. This is truly an all-round relationship, and India is also looking to help UAE in nuclear desalination, which can solve the drinking water problem of a desert country like United Arab Emirates. So looking at these areas of cooperation, you can easily understand how special this relationship is. So you can anticipate a question here, a direct question on the recent progress made in India-UAE relations. So let's see how many of you can write an answer to this question and post your answers in the comment section. Now let's look at the remaining articles. The rest of the articles are relatively smaller, so let's take a quick look and let's wrap up the session for today. On the front page, we have an article that gives us an update with regard to the security situation in Manipur. As you all know, last year, Manipur witnessed massive ethnic violence, which primarily broke out between the majority Meiteis and the Kuki-Zo community over the question of scheduled tribe status, where Meiteis were demanding ST status. Following a court intervention, it triggered protests by the Kuki-Zo community, which is a recognized scheduled tribe. The Kukis have scheduled tribe status in the hill areas of Manipur, whereas Meiteis, who are the majority, who are dominant, are mainly found in the Imphal Valley region. So there is a traditional rivalry between the two communities. In fact, between Meiteis and Nagas as well. Even Nagas are a scheduled tribe found in the hill areas of Manipur. So between Meiteis and Nagas, Meiteis and Kukis, there has been traditional rivalry, which even became a source for the start of insurgency in Manipur in 1960s. So Kukis had their own armed ethnic group fighting for independence from India. Nagas were part of the Naga insurgency, waging a war against the Indian state. And as a result, the Meiteis who felt threatened, they had started their own insurgency. So Meitei-based insurgent groups like People Liberation Army, PLA, or NLFT, National Liberation Front, right? So these groups, they had started insurgency in the 60s, and Manipur in general has witnessed a lot of violence in the 60s, 70s and 80s. But of late, the violence had died down. But since last year, the ethnic divisions have opened up again, where armed ethnic groups from both sides have targeted each other, resulting in large-scale violence over the scheduled tribe status and in general the ethnic divide that exists between the communities. So there have been cross-border factors as well, which have aided the violence from Myanmar. Myanmar, as you know, is going through a major civil war. There has been a refugee flow as well. And the Zomi community are essentially from Myanmar, because there are a few ethnic groups in India, in northeast India, which are connected with ethnic groups on the other side of the border in Myanmar. Like Mizos are connected to the Chins in Myanmar. So similarly, the Kukis in Manipur are linked with the Zomi community. They share very close familial cultural ties. So as refugees flowed in from Myanmar to India, A number of Zomi community members also came across, and this was resisted by the state government and by the Methi population. State government of Manipur has been accused of targeting the Kuki Zo community. It has tried to evict them from their lands by blaming them to be drug traffickers. And this had also led to a face-off between the Kuki Zo community and the state government. So all these factors combined has aided to the ethnic violence which has broken out here. And also there has been a flow of arms and support from across the border. Several Northeast insurgent groups and ethnic armed groups in the Northeast have often enjoyed cross-border support in Myanmar. So after several weeks of violence, the violence had been toned down as the central government responded and increased the security deployment. Home Ministry had taken direct control of the security situation. It had brought in more forces. Apart from reinforcing Assam Rifles, it had also brought in CRPF and other security forces, and it had deployed advisors as well to manage the security situation. The center had even begun talks with different groups to try and find a peaceful solution to this conflict where a lot of people have already been killed. Right? There has been brutal atrocities committed on both sides. After some months of calm, the violence has shown a resurgence again. In the last few days especially, there have been disturbing developments. There have been few attacks using new methods. Drones equipped with explosives have been used by armed groups to carry out attacks in the Imphal Valley. Long-range rockets have been fired. RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades, and long-range rockets have been fired probably for the first time in the Northeast, which indicates the sudden escalation which has happened, and most likely these weapons are coming from across the border. Indian security agencies are alarmed and worried regarding these advanced weaponry and new tactics that the armed ethnic groups have procured. They have got access to long-range rockets and even basic drones, commercially available drones fitted with explosives, which have been used to carry out deadly attacks in Imphal Valley in the last few days. So following this new wave of violence, a lot of protests have broken out and the violence has escalated, especially the student-based groups in Imphal have led protests against the government. They have demanded the center to remove the security advisors, and they have demanded that all the MLAs in the assembly have to resign on moral grounds. So the security situation has become volatile again in Manipur, and the usage of new tactics and new weapons and deadly weapons is a major security concern which is being monitored by the security and intelligence agencies. Next, on page 4 and 5, we have articles related to India-Russia relations and India-Germany relations. One development with regard to India-Russia relationship is that 6 Indian nationals who had been enlisted in the Russian army have been released and they are headed back to India. You might remember we had discussed that close to 100 Indian youth had been misled by middlemen and human traffickers, and they got recruited into the Russian army and they were deployed on the Ukrainian front. A few Indians have lost their lives as well, and this had become a major concern for India. So when Prime Minister Modi visited Russia 2 months ago, he brought up this issue personally with Russian leader Putin. And Putin had promised Modi that Russian army will delist or essentially remove them from the services of the army and send them back to India. So as per this commitment, few Indians have been they have been removed from the Russian army and its services, and they are headed back to India. But still there are many more Indian youth who are caught in this conflict, in this foreign conflict, and we would like to bring all of them back to ensure their safety and well-being. So this is one development. The second development is related to the visit of India's foreign minister to Germany. Dr. Jaishankar is on an important visit to Germany, and during this visit, he has spoken about a possible Indian mediation in the Russia-Ukraine war. Because European media, German media, they have raised questions about India's position on the war. As you all know, India has been largely neutral. We have never criticized Russia for violating Ukraine's sovereignty. We have bypassed the Western sanctions. We have continued our trade relationship. We have become the biggest buyer of Russian oil. And more importantly, we have continued the strategic partnership. We abstained from all the votes against Russia. So there has been criticism in Europe. European think tanks, governments and media, they have been critical of India's approach. So when a similar question was raised a few months ago, asking why India is not helping Europe in its problems, Jaishankar had retaliated with a very strong statement saying that Europe's problems are not the world's problems. That Europe always thinks that its problems becomes the world's problems. It never cares about others' problems, but it tries to push European problems as the global problem. So India had rejected this interference by European countries, and India pointed out that Russia is an all-weather friend. And we always said that the war has to end. This is not the time for war. Prime Minister Modi brought this up multiple times with Putin, urging Russia to end the war by talking to Ukraine. PM Modi visited Ukraine as well just a few days ago, urging Ukraine also to participate in the talks and ensure that the war is brought to an end. So in this regard, there are some big developments happening. When PM Modi conducted these back-to-back visits to Russia and then Ukraine, a lot of speculation came up that India might possibly play the role of a mediator, and maybe India might come out with some solution to bring both parties to the talking table and bring out a negotiated end to this war. So now there has been some progress in this regard. Ajit Doval, India's national security advisor, is currently in Russia to follow up on Modi's visit. According to media reports, Ajit Doval has taken a solution. A 4-point plan, a 4-point action plan has been proposed based on 4 principles which India is pioneering. This has been acknowledged by Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar as well during his visit to Germany. He has said that yes, India is trying to play a role to try and bring this war to an end. We are trying to use our influence with both Russia and Ukraine to make them talk to each other. In this regard, the visit of Ajit Doval to Russia acquires a lot of significance, and Jaishankar has said that India has come out with a 4-point principle to push both countries to talk to each other. So what are these 4 principles? Principle number 1, India has always said that solutions can't be found for disputes in the battlefield. India believes that war is never the solution. We believe in talks and negotiations over conflict. So one principle is that you can't find a solution in the battlefield. This is what PM Modi has conveyed repeatedly to Putin and as well as to Zelensky. That don't continue the war, don't drag the conflict, you don't find solutions in the battlefield. And also India has said, this is not the time for war. The global economy is already suffering from enough consequences. Right? So India has insisted that this is not the time for war, it's the time for peace. And the third principle is that for any peace talks, Russia should be a part of the dialogue process. This is a message from India to Ukraine and West, because Ukraine has pushed for a peace process without Russia. You might remember the Swiss Peace Conference, which we had discussed a few weeks ago. In Switzerland, a peace conference was held for the Ukraine war, which was attended only by Ukraine and Western powers, without Russia, which is the major party in this conflict. There have been other initiatives to achieve peace by excluding Russia. That is impossible, that is impractical. So India has insisted that one important principle is that Russia should be part of the negotiating table. It has to be the key participant with Ukraine. And the fourth principle is that India will remain engaged with both Russia and Ukraine to end this conflict. That India will not step back. India will work with both countries. We will use the friendly relations, the unique position that we have with both of them. Probably there is no other country which can strike this balance. No other world leader could have dreamed of visiting Russia, Ukraine within few days. And PM Modi has managed to do that because of India's independent foreign policy. So India is in this unique position to possibly work out a solution by mediating between Russia, Ukraine, and we are seeing some steps being taken in this regard. So this is something we should continue to track. Next, on the same page in the same article and another article on page 15, we have a very important update on India-Germany relations. Germany is a major European power, a key member of the European Union, major economy, and a major military power as well. So India-Germany are stepping up their relations. See, Germany has always been a big destination for Indian students, Indian workers. We have a big Indian community in Germany. More than 1,25,000 Indians are working and more than 50,000 students are studying in Germany. So we do have a strong cultural people-to-people relationship and economic relationship as well. A lot of German companies are in India, from Bosch to ThyssenKrupp. There are many Indian companies invested in Germany as well. So there is a strong economic relationship. But what is missing is a stronger defense and strategic relationship. So this is what India, Germany are trying to address. Because Germany wants to be a bigger player in the Indo-Pacific region. Germany also has concerns about Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific and South China Sea. China has raised these maritime disputes, violated international law. It has broken down the rules-based order, violated UN clause provisions, the UN Convention on Law of the Sea, and it has threatened peace and stability across the Indo-Pacific. And Germany also acknowledges with India that this is a global concern. Because see, today, almost 60% of the economic output of the world is coming from Indo-Pacific region. This is the focal point of the global economy and global geopolitics. So any escalation of tensions and conflict in South China Sea could disrupt the Indo-Pacific and the global economy. Large volume of global trade, almost 55% of global trade passes through South China Sea. And Germany is mindful of these consequences. So rising Chinese aggression, expansionism and its military misadventures, where it is disrupting freedom of navigation, freedom of overflight, has been flagged by Germany as well as a concern, and it would like to work with India, collaborate with India. So this is a common vision. Germany also would like to play a bigger role in the Indo-Pacific, and it will depend on India for this purpose. So please understand that Germany has been hesitant till now because see, Germany also has a dependency on China. Just like most countries, just like India, US, most countries have become heavily dependent on Chinese manufacturing, even on Chinese investments. So trade with China is critical for Germany's economy today. But Germany is trying to assert itself and even counter Chinese aggression and expansionism, even at the risk of affecting the economic ties between them. Now, this is where Germany is trying to focus on the defense partnership with India. See, if you look at India's defense imports, the major defense suppliers to India are Russia, United States, France, and Israel. These are the top 4 suppliers of military hardware to India. But did you know that Germany is one of the top 5 exporters of weapons? Globally, Germany is amongst the top 5 defense exporters, and yet it barely exports weapons to India. Now, this is something Germany is trying to capitalize upon. And also, Germany knows that Russia's defense industry has been crippled because of the ongoing war. This restricts Russia's ability to supply military hardware to India. So, Germany wants to exploit this opportunity to try and take away a part of the share from Russia and become a key military partner for India to supply military hardware to India. Until now, our defense imports have been very limited. A few German companies have been involved in the submarine sector. German companies have tried to be part of Project 75 of Indian Navy to build diesel submarines. Apart from that involvement in the submarine technology sector, there is no other German involvement in military hardware being given to India. So Germany would like to use the opportunity created with the Russia-Ukraine war to try and take away a part of the defense share from Russia and become a major defense supplier to India. We have also started military exercises, by the way. India, Germany for the first time have conducted an Air Force exercise. In fact, at the multilateral Tarang Shakti exercise that was just recently concluded, German Air Force participated, and it was the first time that German Air Force took part in an exercise in Indian airspace. We also have a naval exercise, and now we are looking to set up a bilateral exercise, a bilateral Air Force exercise between Indian Air Force and German Air Force. So military relations are being stepped up, which means there will be more German naval and Air Force deployment in the Indo-Pacific, and this aligns with India's approach. India would need such support and assistance to counter China in the Indo-Pacific. So that is why I feel this development is very important. Now coming to another important article on page 4. It's related to FATF, an international organization called Financial Action Task Force. FATF is an intergovernmental body established in 1989 by the G7 countries. It was set up primarily to counter money laundering, to implement anti-money laundering measures, because money laundering emerged as a major economic threat. Through money laundering, black money, illegal wealth was being essentially laundered and converted into legal wealth. This is a major economic threat, and it also represents a national security threat because money laundering has often been linked with terrorist financing. Especially the links between money laundering and terror financing was exposed during the 9/11 attacks of 2001. Following this, FATF's mandate was revised, and it also deals with counter-terrorist financing measures. So AML and CTF. So FATF essentially brings out global standards through its recommendations to implement AML measures, anti-money laundering measures, and counter-terrorist financing measures, or CTF. So it comes out with a set of recommendations which are to be implemented as global standards. So economies, jurisdictions around the world are obligated to follow the FATF standards. Through their national laws, they have to implement these global standards and effectively enforce the anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing measures. So FATF has a way to enforce its recommendations as well. Periodically, it conducts a review of every country and every jurisdiction. FATF and its regional bodies, there are around 9 FATF style regional bodies. Together they conduct a periodic review of every country and every jurisdiction to check whether countries are updating their laws, to check whether they are implementing the measures in the banking system, in the financial system, to check possibility of money laundering and terrorist financing. Right? FATF recommends that you should have a stringent law that declares money laundering as a criminal punishable offense. FATF recommends that the proceeds of money laundering should be confiscated by the authorities during an investigation. FATF recommends that there should be a dedicated law enforcement agency like India's Enforcement of Directorate to tackle money laundering. There should be a financial intelligence unit to track suspicious financial transactions happening in the banking and financial system. These are some of the recommendations. Right? It also recommends the standards with regard to record keeping, account keeping, KYC norms to ensure that banking financial system is not misused for money laundering, terror financing initiatives. So India has followed these standards through PMLA, Prevention of Money Laundering Act. We have implemented the FATF standards. We have amended PMLA repeatedly to revise and upgrade to the FATF global standards. And through UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, we have introduced the counter-terrorist financing measures as well. So through these two laws, India has strictly followed and abided by the FATF global standards through Prevention of Money Laundering Act and Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. We have a functional enforcement directorate which keeps enforcing the law, which keeps tackling money laundering and foreign exchange offences. And we also have a financial intelligence unit that keeps a check on the financial and banking system. So FATF periodically conducts a review of the countries and jurisdictions, and if countries don't match those standards, if it finds a country is deliberately not following the standards and enabling money laundering and terror financing, those countries can be given a notice by putting them on the grey list. A country is given a notice by placing it on the grey list. It means that this country is not following the standards and it has enabled money laundering and terror financing. So after grey listing a country, FATF gives an action plan and a deadline. It gives the changes to be implemented with an action plan and a deadline. So if the country shows progress, in the next review, it will be removed from the grey list. But if a country is deliberately not cooperating, if it is deliberately not following these standards and measures, then the grey listed country can be blacklisted. So getting blacklisted and even getting grey listed has severe economic consequences. It will shut off your global economy. It will bring sanctions, economic sanctions against the country. It will cut off you from international trade. No one will invest in such a country which is blacklisted. Even grey listing will affect the flow of investments. It will affect your sovereign credit rating. So can you tell me which are the blacklisted countries by FATF in the comments? There are few countries which have been blacklisted. So please let me know which are these countries. So India is now up for a periodic review. Right now our turn has come to be reviewed by FATF, and FATF is checking whether India has followed the standards. And in the report which it has submitted, it has praised India for adopting and implementing most of the standards against money laundering and terrorist financing. However, it has suggested some changes and improvements when it comes to few preventive measures. The conviction rate under PMLA has been a point of concern, and also the checks and balances in the financial sector has been lacking because a lot of scandals have come up in the fintech sector which has rapidly expanded. So these concerns have been flagged by FATF and it has asked India to improve upon them. But otherwise, India has been praised by FATF as a secure nation, as a financially stable nation which has strictly followed the global standards. So this is like a pat in the back for India. it's like an award for India because this enhances the visibility of our economy, the credibility of our economy. This can bring more investments to India. Just like getting penalized by FATF, if you get grey listed or blacklisted, there is a penalty where your economy, your investments get affected. Similarly, getting reviewed by FATF is a very positive thing. That too, when you get praise from FATF, it shows that you are following the global standards, implementing these strict measures, and you have a stable, secure economy. So this will bring more investments into India, and India is willing to upgrade again to match the global FATF standards. And also FATF is going to consult India's private sector next year as it comes out with the 16th set of recommendations. Next year FATF is expected to come out with a new list of recommendations, the upgraded list. So while preparing the proposal for the 16th set of recommendations, FATF is likely to engage with India's business community, the private industry as well. Because private industries today play a big role in the financial markets. So FATF will be engaging with all the private stakeholders as well. Next on the same page, we have another article related to cyber frauds. Cyber frauds and online scandals and scams which have started flourishing in Southeast Asia, especially in Myanmar, which is part of the Golden Triangle region, which is a hub of drug trafficking and organized crime, and in the neighboring countries, Laos and Cambodia. There are many criminal mafias which are operating, engaging in gambling scams, online scams, and cyber crimes. What is unfortunate is that many Indians have been trapped by these criminal mafias, and Indian youth have been forced to work in these countries. This has become a nightmare for India. Several Indian youth, even engineers and software engineers, they have been duped by middlemen, human traffickers and middle agents who have promised them lucrative jobs in Thailand and other Southeast Asian countries. So in the name of securing a foreign job, they are tricking them to go to Thailand or other Southeast Asian country, from where they are often kidnapped and trafficked into Myanmar, Laos or Cambodia. According to data with the Ministry of External Affairs, close to 15,000 Indians are trapped. They are not allowed to go back, their passports are confiscated, and they are even brutally beaten, exploited, unless and until they do the work of the criminal mafias. So all your fake WhatsApp calls, your Telegram messages, the fraudulent links that you are getting, asking you to invest in a crypto scheme, asking you to take up an online job where you will get paid heftily. All these scam communication which you are receiving on your mail, on your WhatsApp, on your social media, most of this is emerging from this region, from Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, around the Golden Triangle, where several criminal gangs are operating, which are essentially controlled by Chinese mafias. This has become a nightmare for India, security nightmare for India. So Indian government has started acting against this. The MEA has worked with Laos and Cambodia, even Thailand and Myanmar, and we have rescued some of the Indians. Several Indians have been recently rescued and safely brought back. And NIA is targeting the middlemen, the human traffickers who are duping the Indian youth. So there are few middle agents who are promising these lucrative foreign jobs and tricking Indian youth to go to these countries where they are pushed into these criminal scandal centers. So NIA has arrested some of the human traffickers involved in this operation. It has charge sheeted them, and it highlights the fight that India is waging against these cyber frauds and online scams that primarily originate from this part of Southeast Asia. Coming to the last article under the Prelims section, again from internal security, there is a big development. Ministry of Home Affairs has started some new initiatives to step up cybersecurity. Home Minister Amit Shah has launched these initiatives, and you should be aware of this. Amit Shah has acknowledged the problems when it comes to protecting and safeguarding the cyberspace. The Home Minister has pointed out that in the cyber domain, there are no geographical boundaries. See, we might have different states, different countries. We might have these imaginary boundaries that establish jurisdiction in the physical space. But the cyberspace is a virtual space. There are no boundaries that exist. The cyber criminal, the hacker, the attacker could be in any state, in any country, right? They could be proxy actors who could be concealing their identity, their location, becoming completely anonymous. So when you're fighting this new age war against cybercrime, cyber espionage and cyber warfare, you need to prepare those capabilities that are required. You need to be mindful that there are no boundaries in the virtual space. So to enable our efforts against cybercrime, Government of India has started an initiative called the Cyber Suspect Registry, a national database of cyber suspects. Previously, this database was maintained at the state level. Each state, the concerned state police, they have their own cyber wings or cyber divisions. They would maintain a separate registry or a database of the suspects involved in cyber crimes. But since the concept of geographical boundaries is irrelevant when it comes to cyber crimes, it is important to have a national database. So that is why the Home Ministry has now created a cyber suspect registry at the national level, which will be available to all the state police forces. So this is one major initiative. Second, Home Ministry has set up Cyber Fraud Mitigation Center, the CFMC. This will allow the security law enforcement agencies, the police forces to work together with the banking industry, the finance industry, the e-commerce companies, where most of the online frauds and cyber crimes and scams are being committed. Right? So the private sector, from fintech companies to digital wallets, payment gateways, banks and finance institutions and e-commerce companies, they will all coordinate with police, security and law enforcement agencies at the center and state level to mitigate cyber frauds, which has become very rampant. So Cyber Fraud Mitigation Center has been set up. And another important initiative is the establishment of cyber commandos. India is creating a professional workforce, a well-trained professional workforce of 5,000 cybersecurity professionals who will be called cyber commandos. Just like Army, Navy, Air Force have their special forces like Para-SF, Marcos, or like NSG Black Cat commandos who deal with terrorism and other physical threats. On similar lines, a specialist cybersecurity force is being raised, a team of 5,000 cybersecurity professionals who will be called cyber commandos. So their services will be available to both the center and the states. They will assist both center and states in tackling cyber crimes and cyber offences and in safeguarding the Indian cyberspace. So this is where I would like to mention the important institutions in India that deal with cybersecurity. We have CERT In, Computer Emergency Response Team India, which is the nodal authority to protect and safeguard Indian cyberspace, established under the Ministry of Electronics and IT. Apart from CERT In, we also have a Defence Cyber Agency. It's a tri-service armed force drawing from Army, Navy and Air Force to deal with cyber wars. So it's a dedicated military agency, a tri-service military unit to deal with cyber warfare. Then we also have the National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center, NCIIPC, which was established through the National Cybersecurity Policy of 2013. So this cybersecurity agency specifically focuses on safeguarding the critical information infrastructure of India. The IT infrastructure, the cyber infrastructure which runs our critical infrastructure, from airports to railway network, banks, stock markets, key government institutions, power plants, nuclear plants, right? This is the critical infrastructure of India, and the IT systems running them will be protected by NCIIPC. Then we also have the Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center, the I4C, Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center. This functions under Ministry of Home Affairs to coordinate between center and states to solve cyber crimes. There is also a dedicated cybercrime reporting portal which the Home Ministry has set up, the National Cybercrime Reporting Portal, and we have a I4C, the Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center, essentially to coordinate with center and states when it comes to solving and tackling cybercrimes. These are the various institutions created at the national level with the new initiatives. This is supposed to strengthen India's cyber safety and cyber security. On this note, I would like to bring my discussion to an end. I hope you've understood all the articles and I hope you found the discussion to be interesting and relevant. If you did, please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to press the like button and do subscribe to our channel. So that is it for today. Let's catch up tomorrow at 10 a.m. Till then, take care. Have a good day.